How do you pronounce that one lady name? It's something with O. It's like Orgeline. Yeah.
Oh, Orgeline. Okay, this will get
Reading about the freedom schools in Wisconsin, there was like civil rights era, and we had a lot of black people who worked with freedom schools. Were they influenced by the freedom schools?
And that wall that you all saw in the Welcome Center, that entire wall is dedicated to the freedom schools that were created primarily during Freedom Summer. Now, there were freedom schools before 1964. One of the earliest freedom schools was founded in Clarksdale, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta. And it was the same concept of getting young people together to discuss ideas, ask questions, and think about ways of challenging injustices and some of the things that were taking place right here in the state of Mississippi. So a lot of those individuals are still living in the same community. Many of those who were, how old are you all? Okay, well they were much younger. They're middle school age, high school age students. But a lot of them live here in Jackson, and we're hoping that they will be here for the grand opening next week. But what I'll do right now is pretty much set you up for the walking tour, as well as get you all to think about what's going on in your own communities. Now, by profession, normally I'm in the classroom teaching. I taught at Ole Miss, which is the University of Mississippi, and y'all may have degrees in history, focusing on African American history, but with emphasis on the civil rights movement. So I'm very familiar with the narrative. Isn't that right, Lee?
That's right. That's right.
But the brochures that you got, they are for you to take. Yes, sir.
We talk about the civil rights movement, and the majority of it's concentrated on the Southern state, particularly the Bible Belt. What was the segregation like in the North? I mean, were there white and colored things available?
There were, and I want to tell you, the reason why CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, is so important is this is the first organization that tackled segregation in the North.
Okay.
So, let's say 1947, even before 1961 with the freedom rides that took place that ended here in Jackson, Mississippi, there was a freedom ride called the Journey of Reconciliation that took place. So CORE tackled racism in the North and segregation in the North. So it was really more prevalent here in the South, which made it really key for African Americans as well as supporters of the movement itself to try to deal with Jim Crow here in this area. But this particular scene right here, I'm not sure if this looks familiar. It probably doesn't because you're not from Jackson. But right here is, you don't see my little red tab, but that's the Cocoa Building. This is June 15th, 1963. This is a procession of mourners after the funeral of Medgar Evers at the Masonic Temple. So you all will be visiting the Masonic Temple today as a part of your walking tour. But this right here visual is just representative of all of the civil rights activity that took place along Lynch Street during the 1960s. Beginning in 1961, one of the first offices for the Jackson Nonviolent Movement was located right here on Lynch Street. Of course, the Masonic Temple is located right here on Lynch Street. There were a number of activities that took place dealing with Jackson State college students. And of course, Jackson State is an extension of this area. This building is operated by the university. We will talk about what happened in 1967 as well as what happened in 1970 on that particular campus. But the building that you see in the corner, right up here, actually still stands. So when you all leave to go to lunch today, if you just look straight across the street, you will still see Chambliss on the building. That was one of the things the owner said, do not paint over my family's name, but the building is red, white, and blue. But that building still stands. And a lot of civil rights history, civil rights activity took place along the street. As you see, Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy directly behind him, Ward Wilkins of the NAACP walking beside him, and of course the two ministers across the front are local ministers from churches here in Jackson who are leading that procession. Now, as I mentioned, the Masonic Temple is extremely important when you all It's kind of like having a spiritual moment, this cathartic moment. But the reason this building is so important, it is known as the Cathedral of the Mississippi Movement. But the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party also held a number of its meetings there. The Masonic Temple was the place of Medgar Evers' funeral. In addition to that, the Masonic Temple also hosted numerous mass meetings that took place during the movement years. But one thing I want you all to understand, does it take the masses to make a mass meeting?
No.
Right. If there were only 1, 2, or 3 people that came, there was still work being done for the movement. And that was one of the famous quotes of Fannie Lou Hamer. She said, it doesn't take many to make a movement happen. But also with the Masonic Temple, you all will hear more about Ben Brown, who was killed in 1967. His funeral was also held there. He was a local cocoa worker who was killed by Mississippi Highway Patrolman as a result of a riot that took place between Jackson State College students and local law enforcement. We will go visit some of these sites. But before our visitors coming in, because many of them were young people during the Civil Rights Movement, and I will talk more about youth activism here in Jackson. But just to get you all to talk and thinking about some of the issues that are taking place where you live. What part of Minnesota are you all from? Wisconsin. Milwaukee. Oh, you all are from Milwaukee, Miss Wisconsin. Keith, why did I say Minnesota?
It's the same thing on us, right?
Okay, I don't know why I said Minnesota, but I will make that change on Facebook. I was told Minnesota, so. But Milwaukee, Wisconsin, great place. Never been there, but I hear it's great. But what are some of the issues that you as young people, during the movement, prior to a full-scale movement here in the state of Mississippi, these are the things that young people were speaking out against? Horrible cafeteria food. But this was the beginning for them. They were speaking out against secondhand textbooks. Of course, they were getting these textbooks that were not quality. They were torn up, they were ragged, but they had to make do with what they had. They were dealing with the fact that they had to make use of a segregated YMCA. They had to deal with the fact that they had to swim in colored swimming pools. And one of the city swimming pools that was designated for black children was located over here in this area down at College Park. And hopefully we'll get to walk that far to that end of campus, to College Park Auditorium. But these are the things that young people were dealing with. And of course, as they became more acutely aware of these racial boundaries that had been created for an entire race of people, they wanted to deal with them. Now, of course, this is the 1950s, 1960s. Let's fast forward to 2012. With you all being 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, what are the issues that are taking place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or in your own hometowns that you feel you all, as young people, that you can kind of organize around? Yes, sir. Tell me your name.
My name is Robert.
Robert, and what's the issue?
Having to wear Marquette apparel just so you won't fit into the stereotype.
Having to wear the Marquette apparel so you won't fit into the stereotype. Now explain it. I know Marquette University, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now explain what's the issue behind it.
If you don't wear the apparel at night, people don't think like you're a criminal and you might rob them or something. Just because you have to wear.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, Robert. Now how would you deal with that? How would you organize around that particular issue? That's interesting.
That's what bright colors.
Huh?
That's what bright colors.
You just wear bright
I know
colors.
Pepper's gonna rob with a pink shirt on.
Okay. Yes, sir. Your name? You had your name?
Yeah, like a little bit broader of an issue is Zach.
What's your name?
Zach.
Zach. Okay.
We have tremendous inequality in education in Milwaukee, especially here throughout the state. We have a lot of disparities between Milwaukee public schools and like public schools in the rest of the state.
I think education is going to continue to be an issue that all young people need to rally around. I recently heard about the Occupy movement dealing with student loans. And of course, you all are at that age. And I am at the age where I'm still paying student loans and probably will be doing so for the next couple of years. Not couple of years, just in the next some years. I don't want to tell you all my age, but I think education is going to continue to be an issue that not just young people, but even you need to get parents, grandparents involved in understanding how important this is of an issue in terms of getting a quality education. And we have a wonderful, I mentioned to you all the Young People's Project earlier. We have a wonderful youth organizer here in Jackson named Albert Sykes. And that is one of the missions of the Young People's Project, is to deal with quality education as a constitutional right. So, Zach, I'm going to ask the question of you. How could you organize around getting people to understand how important funding is in order, if we're talking about having equitable education between public and private, how would you organize around the funding, particularly the funding, because that is an issue. Here in Mississippi, we are even visiting these discussions of charter schools. But charter schools will be funded by state money. And after 3 years, if they're ineffective, that's a waste of money that could be going to the public schools to improving that situation. And we have a number of schools here that are being taken over by the state. But how would you organize around that issue? And how would you get other people to rally around what you're doing?
I think for me, like, the biggest thing is obviously I'm not still in schools and I didn't go to MPS schools, but like trying to get the kids that are in the MPS schools out and like make them realize that they have a voice and that they need to be advocates for themselves and kind of giving them the tools and, you know, putting them in the right direction to help them advocate for themselves. Because I think it's really powerful for school board officials or legislators if they actually get to hear from the people that their decisions are going to be affecting. A lot of times youth aren't represented at that table.
Right.
I'd also add though to students that did go into MPS also have an attending lecture series, shadow a student, shadow a teacher, attend a board meeting, continuing meeting at the MPS schools. So then it becomes their issue as well.
Right.
Not just MPS.
I think that there's dealing with Wisconsin, I'm from Wisconsin, deeply involved in the movement for equitable funding. There's a large issue in the way that we fund schools in general, publicly. In Wisconsin, a lot of that has to do with the equalization formula, which really puts a lot of burden on property taxpayers and creates a lot of disparity due to, like the Lake Bell, there's property taxes up there that are going to the schools, but it's still figured in the formula. And I think that we need to move away. I think students need to particularly say that we need to move towards, it's called adequacy, where you build floors, not ceilings, where every student gets a base amount of funding. And then if you're a special needs student, that's an extra level. If you're, if you're in a rural area, that's an extra level from the state because it should be coming from the state. And if students are speaking up about this and going to school board meetings and finally demanding the education that is guaranteed to them by our state constitution, it starts to change things. And it needs to start at a grassroots level. Students need to organize in their own schools because that's the only way they can make choices.
Good point. Two of our oral history panelists are here, but hold that thought because right now I think we've had 3 people express, and then I think that even we can pull in this whole idea of wearing Marquette paraphernalia, and we can pull that into education. So after lunch, we will revisit what you all can do because I'm sure that others of you who are very quiet, I like to come and just touch you on the shoulder and say, what do you think? So I see a lot of faces. I'm going to come start touching shoulders after lunch. But I will stop right there. So if you all can think of some other issues, we will talk about that again as we talk more about the young people here in Jackson. And this is one of our young people here in Jackson who was here in the movement. And Keith, I'm going to turn it over to Keith to do introductions.
Sure.
For these 2 young ladies, but I will see you all in the future.
And we're still waiting on one other person. Well, actually 2 other people. I'm just waiting for them to come in at any moment. Now, let me just check one thing before I even come up.
Plenty. Sure. Sorry, please. Do you want a new one or
Right now we have before we have two great young ladies here in the Jackson, Mississippi area, and they are going to really come and share with you their stories and the experiences that they've had in the movement. Both of their experiences have been rather significant for them. And once they share these stories with you, I think that you will definitely understand a little bit more about your involvement as young people in the movement. And I think we have Ms. Dolores Lynch Williams here. She was a freedom rider. Are you all familiar with freedom rides? Okay. And she's going to tell you a story about how she got involved with that and how I don't think she planned to. It wasn't her intent to just go out and become a freedom rider, but she's going to share that story with you. And then we have Ms. Fonzie Brown Wright with us. She's a native of Canton, Mississippi. And Canton, you all familiar with Canton, Mississippi? Okay, so we have some, I believe that's where they made the movie, A Time to Kill.
My dog Skip. Yeah.
That's right, and my dog Skip.
Where I'm at.
There we go, there we go. But the city of Canton is rich in history as well, and I wish we had time that we could just go up there and take a visit or walk through, because the city of Canton is also a great historic place, and it's the home of many people. And like I said, of many people that were involved in the movement. And with Ms. Fonzie Brown Wright, she's going to share with us her story and how she got involved in the movement. And the thing is, everybody's story is different, and everybody's involvement is different. And different stories, even though everybody's story is different, holistically, they all come together and play a significant part in the history of Mississippi. Okay, and then we have two other people that's coming in, Mr. Charles McLaurin, and he's going to come in, and we have Mr. Hollis Watkins here, great, Mr. Hollis Watkins, as he's coming in, he is the chair of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, which they'll be having a conference here starting on next week, on next Wednesday. Yes, ma'am, you all can get here. And as he's coming around, and he's going to share his story. And this is a young man too that I believe was back in the day. He was the one that got people engaged as young people. I mean, he's a songster, and I don't know if he brought any of his CDs here today, but he's probably going to ask them to sort of lead us in some songs before you all leave today, and some freedom songs. So he's going to do that. And then, like I said, we also have Mr. Charles McLaurin that's going to be on his way. And so at this time, while we have these three panelists up here, we would just like to give them a hand. And I mean, I guess the order that they set in right now, I think that might be a pretty good order to go in. And so we can just start with Ms. Williams, if you don't mind. All right.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. First of all, I have to give honor to God, who's truly the head of my life. And without him, I would not be standing here today before you guys. Growing up in Mississippi, as a very young person, I saw a lot of things that were not right. I saw the colored signs on the bathrooms, doors. I saw the white signs. I saw the white and colored signs in restaurants. Some restaurants you could not go in. They had shoe stores. One on Capitol Street was Provisions. You could not go there to buy shoes. But if you knew somebody, because first of all, you could not try the shoes on because you were black. But if you knew somebody that you could give the money to buy the shoes, a white person, then you could get the shoes, okay? There were so much going on. I remember when Emmett Till was murdered, I was about 9 years old. He went to Money, Mississippi, to visit his uncle. And it was stated that he whistled at a white woman. Later on, I found out that he spoke with a lisp. And a lot of times when his words came out, it was like a whistling sound. So I'm speaking for myself. I do not believe he whistled at that lady, but as he was talking, it came out as maybe a whistle. But anyways, he was taken from his home by his wife's husband and the stepbrother. And they literally went to his uncle's house and they took him out of bed and they beat him, killed him. They threw him in, I believe it was the Tallahassee River. So at the funeral, his mother did not try to conceal anything. She wanted people to see what had been done to her son. We visited that place last year, and we saw the store, Brian's grocery store. We actually saw it. We saw where we were told that his uncle lived across the railroad tracks, where the guys went and got him out of bed and killed him. Now, all of those things were wrong. Being 9 years old, at that time, I knew that was wrong. I knew it was wrong to just kill somebody. Even if it was stated that they did whistle at somebody, that was just wrong. Also, when I was a young girl growing up in Mississippi, a blacks could be standing outside at night, and it was nothing for policemen to come by with a flashlight and shine it on the black boy, not the black girl. So, but they did those kind of things. I remember that I started going down to the Masonic Temple, and I was listening to Bernard Lafayette, James Bell, and other civil rights figures, and everything that they were saying was true. I was only 15 years old at the time, and it was just so much, and it just, what can you really do about it? You're young. Your parents really cannot do anything about it because they have house notes to pay, they have food to buy, they have to take care of you. So it's really nothing that they can do. And they know also it's a very dangerous time. So it was a group of us who were going to the Masonic Temple, and that's right down the street here. And so, I just decided that I wanted to do something, didn't know what really that I was going to do. But let me back up. Also, the school system. We had only, we had certain schools for the black children. Well, at that particular time, we were called colored, not black. And that was Jim Hill and Brinkley and Lanier. And we had the colleges for blacks only, which was Jackson State University, which John graduated of. We had Alcorn, some people say Alcorn, and we had Tougaloo College, and we had Mississippi Valley State. Now, we could not go to any of those white colleges, and we walked to school while they rode the buses. But then later on, okay, something good came out of that because, we were getting good exercise and everything, so that was a positive thing to do. But, we walked a long ways to school, and they would ride back on the buses. Okay. After all of these things going on, and I'm just seeing all of these things, and then I'm like, all of it, it's just not right. So I could not go and talk to my parents and tell them what I wanted to do, because being an obedient child, I would have obeyed them, because they would have told me, Lois, no, you cannot, you cannot go down to the bus station because it's very dangerous, and we don't want this for you. I could not tell my siblings because they would have told on me. So then I still could not have gone. So what we decided to do, we were going to go down to the Trailway bus station, July 9th, 1961, and purchase a ticket to go. We're really going to Canton, Mississippi, Mrs. Wright. That's where we were going. And what happened was we went on the white area. We didn't go on the colored side. So they did not like that. So we were arrested. We were handcuffed you, they really disturbed my peace. And if you ever see my mug shot, you will see that I was very angry. But anyways, I was taken to the county jail, and then I was taken to the city jail. I was treated as like I was a criminal, okay? The mug shot, the fingerprints, and everything. And I was in jail for a total of 11 days. During that time, my parents were not allowed to see me. Now, they told them I was there, but can you imagine the heartache and the devastation with parents when somebody tells you your child is there, but you cannot see your child? So they would not let them see me. After I was out of jail, I was placed on probation for a year, and I had a curfew to be in at a certain time. And if I had missed it, I would have gone back to jail. When I got out of jail, also people asked me, said, well, did you know you could have spanking or anything or whipping? I said, no. My parents were very proud of me because I did something that they could not do. Now, going back to the universities and everything, I must say this. I have 4 beautiful daughters. They were able to attend universities that I could not. My baby daughter graduated from Mississippi State University and also received her BS and master's degrees there. My third child went to Mississippi College. I could not go there. And she went there and received a specialist there. And now she's receiving a doctorate from Mississippi State University. Saying those things to just let you know that things that I could not do, my girls were able to do. Not only my girls, but other people as well. So I'm truly thankful for that. Somebody asked me, when you were in jail, did anybody bother you? Because I was in a cell by myself. Some young ladies were in jail with maybe 2 others or maybe 1 other. But I was in jail in a cell by myself. And so after we were put in this black paddy wagon, I tell you, really truly at that particular time, I was not afraid. But much later on, after I thought about it, really truly, people, they could have taken us off, they could have beat us, they could have killed us, they could have thrown our bodies somewhere and we never could have been located. Because you know why? We had told our parents we were going to church, okay? It's wrong to lie, young people. It really truly is. But I lied for a good reason. But I'm so thankful to God that I'm here today because I know that for such a time as this, that I'm here to tell my story so that God, and only God alone, will receive the glory. And I'm just so thankful that I just made up my mind to do something to help pave the way for other people. So you young people can travel anywhere you want to travel, airplane, bus, however you want to go. You can go to any library you want to go to. You can do all of these things. You don't have to worry about going to the back of a bus. And during those particular days, the buses, for the whites, they had a lot of space, like from here, going way to here. And then back in the other little area where the blacks, it was like this. And then if a white person came in, guess what would happen? They want a black person to give up that seat to that white person. And sometimes if they were walking on one side of the street, they didn't want the blacks on that side. They wanted them to walk on another side of the street. All of those things, they are very wrong. So the thing about it is, if you feel that it's something in your heart you know that you need to do, and you're doing it for the right reason, I just would say to just go ahead and do it. And I am truly grateful to be here today. Are there any questions? Yes.
What was your involvement after your arrest? Did you go out and do more, or was that kind of the end of the road?
No, it wasn't the end, but I wasn't just, you know how you do things behind the scene, okay, but I was still actively involved in helping people to get, to go and vote and all of these different kind of
So
things.
more grassroots rather than public protest.
That's true, exactly right, exactly right. And another thing, no matter how old a man, black man or black lady was, they were referred to as uncle, aunt, boy, and girl. And that is totally disrespectful. And I thank you all for this. time with my sister Dolores, who's known each other since, as we say, back in the day. We also working with Mr. Hollis Watkins, who is truly an icon, and also Mr. McLaurin. My name is Flonzy Brown Wright. If you Google my name, you'll need to Google Flonzy Goodlawn Wright. But you'll come up. Well, before I tell you what I want to share with you, I want to do two things. I want to tell you a little bit about my Mississippi background, my family background, because that is what has been, that has sustained me and has propelled me, even though I didn't realize at the time, but my home training, okay, has certainly played a significant role in my life. But let me ask you guys a question. Tell me quickly, where are you from? Where are you from?
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, all of you from Milwaukee?
Chicago.
Chicago, Kansas City,
Boston.
Boston,
Baltimore.
New York. Okay, so you're at different colleges and universities, in those particular cities.
All of the same university, but our hometown is different.
What is the university?
Marquette University.
Very good, very good. Okay, just need to have that frame of reference, so very good. I was born in a little community called Farm Haven. Farm Haven, Mississippi is about 16 miles east of Canton. And as Mr. Keith was saying, Canton was really a hot spot back in the day, and I'm going to share some snippets of that as we proceed. But I was born in a farming community. Farm Haven was an area that was owned predominantly by black farmers. And so my upbringing in that little community, as I said, kind of sealed and solidified my commitment to make things better for people. My father was one of 13 children. His father had been a sharecropper. But he was determined that not one of his 13 would be a sharecropper. But here's a man who was the son of a slave, could not read, could not write, and could not hear. When he was 16 years old, he became very ill, and because there was no medical care back in the country to treat black patients so readily, he lost his hearing. So here's a man, 13 children, could not read, could not write, because at that time the law in Mississippi said, if you are a slave, or if you are a descendant of a slave, you can have no education. Now, that's been in my lifetime. That's it, even though that's been back in the day. I remember my grandfather very, very well. So what was this man going to do? And I share this with you so that you would understand how we got where we are today. It didn't just happen because somebody thought it was a nice idea. It didn't just happen by osmosis. It happened, and when you hear the term, somebody paved the way, I want you to have a clear understanding of some of those people in my life who paved the way for me to go on and become who I am becoming. Okay? So what was Papa Rob going to do? He was a very smart man, had a lot of intuitive foresight, as we call old-fashioned mother wit. Y'all heard that term? Mother wit is what you're born with. And it depends on how you use it, would depend on how far you go in life. So my grandfather had 3 jobs. He was born the son of a slave, and he died a businessman. But let me tell you what he did. He made molasses. He made molasses. If you had a syrup at IHOP,
Yeah.
or if you had Angelina's molasses, boy, he put her as a shame. So he made molasses. And I remember as a little girl, back in the country, going to this little molasses place where he had tall barrels of sugarcane cooking. And I said to Papa Rob, I'm 4 years old. And I said to Papa Rob, because people would engage him, they would say, when the molasses When Rob Brown started making those molasses now, save me 10 cans. Save me 3 cans, whites and blacks. Purchased the molasses from him. So one day, I was at the place, and he was a tall, very dark-skinned man with big hands and big feet. And I said, Papa Rob, how do you know? Now, he could read us. He could engage you in a conversation. Papa Rob, how do you know how to make those molasses so good? Now, I'm old. And this is what he said to me. And this saying rings in my head every time I think about I'm tired and I don't want to go no more speaking place. I don't want to travel no more. These words come to me. He said, baby, ain't nothing to it but to do. Now, what was he saying to me? You take the hand you dealt and you work it. And you work it. So he made molasses in the summertime. Then in the wintertime, he killed hogs. Everybody knew that when it's hog killing time, go get Rob Brown. Because it was something about the juggler vein, you know how, no, you don't know, but I don't either, but anyway. There was a certain way that you had to kill that hog so that taste would not filter through the meat of your pork chops and all of that. So anyway, he killed hogs. And the third thing my grandfather did, he was a grave digger. A grave digger. So every Monday morning, Papa Rob would throw a shovel on his back. And he would walk 10, 15, maybe 20 miles just to see who died. Listen to me. So that he could dig a $7 grave. A $7 grave. Now, there was no equipment. There was no machine. With those big black hands, with those numbers size 13 feet, he dug graves. Because he was determined that not one of his children would be a shepherd. And I'm happy to report that not one was a shepherd. Every one of those 13 owned some kind of a little business. House cleaning, car washing, a grist mill. You know what a grist mill is? A grist mill is a little place where when the field corn had been picked and shucked, you brought barrels of wagon loads of corn to the grist mill and you ground that corn up, and that's where you get your cornmeal from, or your hominy for your hominy grits. My uncle owned the grist mill, another uncle owned the car repair shop. Another uncle was an electrician. One daughter died young. The second daughter had a house cleaning business in Gary. So he put that extra step into his children, and they put it into us. Now in Farm Haven, I attended a one-room school. One-room school, built on the back of a church by men in the community. In that one-room school shack, we had one teacher. And in that school, we had 15 students. And we ranged from grades pre-primer to the 8th grade, because the law at that time said that you can only educate black children in the country up to the 8th grade. So the 8th grade was as high as my mother and father could go. So we have come now from no education for blacks to now the 8th grade for black children. And so in that one-room school shack, taught by one teacher who had 8 grades. And the grades, as I said, ranged from pre-primitive to the 8th grade. So which meant that she would have to come and spend 5 minutes with the 2nd grade teaching them English, and maybe 10 minutes over with one person who may have been in the 4th grade teaching him or her arithmetic. And so that's how we were able to receive that education. Now, we didn't have a blackboard. Didn't have a blackboard. And one day, a house in the country had burned. And my father, who walked 7 miles in the morning to catch his ride to go to work to help build the natural trace, had been on trace.
You know about the Natchez Trace in Mississippi? The Natchez Trace is a beautiful trail that you can pick up from just outside of Jackson, and it goes very, very nice state-owned area. So my father would walk, get up in the morning at 4:30, walk 7 miles down to the road to catch his ride to come and help to build the Natchez Trace. So one day on his way home, this house had burned, and he spotted an old door, a door, and he brought that door home. He found some paint in the community, and he came back and he must have put 10 or 15 coats of paint on that door. And when that door dried, he brought that door and he nailed that door to the wall of our one-room school shack so that Mrs. Pickett, our teacher, could send us to the blackboard to learn how to do our ABCs and 1 + 1 and 2 + 2. Now crayon, just a little simple thing is crayon. She had relatives who lived in Chicago, in the Windy City, who were teachers. And they would save for those little bitty pieces of crayon, maybe an inch long, and pack them up and send them to Mississippi for her so that her students would be able to use those little pieces of crayon on that old door in that classroom. But those things kept our community bonded. A little one-room shack, 10 by 10, built on the back of a church with a big old stove in the center of the room. Now, in that stove, Miss Pickett was too small to put the wood in. So men from the community, and I'll tell you this, so that you can understand clearly how we made it in Mississippi, how we made it in the South, what kept us together, what kept us solidified in our resolve to see the civil rights movement through. And so we didn't have a lunchroom, just one room. But in the morning, Mrs. Pickett, when she would come to school, she would walk down to a little brook, and she would put water in a little foot tub. So when we got to school with our sandwiches and our milk or water, Kool-Aid, or sweet water, she would take our little jars and put that in that tub. And then she would put our sandwiches on that stove so that by 12 o'clock, we would have a hot sandwich and some cool water, Kool-Aid to drink. And then we moved from Farmhaven to Canada, but those things back in my young years, again, have helped propel me to become just a foot soldier, just an activist. When we moved to Canton, I knew nothing about black and white because I told you about my father's side of the people. My mom's side of the people were mixed with Indian, white, and Creole. My great-great-grandfather on my mom's side was in fact a white man. And so I know both cultures. I know the white culture. I know how the great-great-grandfather on the white side would come down the road in the wagon, bringing food to the second family. So I know about all of that as well. And so when we moved to Canton, I attended public and private schools in Canton. I married, went to California, and it was in California that I saw the civil rights movement explode on TV. I knew nothing about racism because we never heard those words in our home. Our parents didn't teach us segregation, separatism. Mother always said to us, "You as good as anybody. You can do it. If somebody else can do it, then so can you." And when I saw all of the civil rights of people going to jail, people like my sister Dolores going to jail, throw being beaten and shot at it, tear gas and shit, I knew nothing about any of this. So in a conversation with my mother, I asked her, "Mother, why did I not know any of this?" She said, "Well, baby, we were trying to shield you and your brothers from the ugliness of racism." I returned to Mississippi in 1962. A year later, Mandela was assassinated. That to me was my defining moment. I knew about Emmett Till. I was 12 years old when he was killed. I knew about Emmett Till because that same year, I had two cousins who were killed in a very similar fashion. Two young boys walking down the road in Cosesco, Mississippi. Oprah Winfrey's on town. Truck pulls up, six white guys in the truck. "Hey, you boys want to ride? Where y'all going?" "We're going to the store." "Hop on the truck. We'll take it." Those men took my two first cousins down the road, killed them, chained their bodies to that truck, and drug them until they died. So I knew about those stories, okay? So coming back, and when Medgar was assassinated, June 12, 1963, I said, this is my time. I didn't know what to do, because I knew nothing about what I was about to embark upon. But then being in Canton, where so much activity was going on, COFO, SNCC, CORE, NAACP, Board Education Project, anybody who was anybody, settled in Canton, Mississippi, because we had a potential voting population of more than 10,000 at that time, but only 100 folk were registered. They were mainly school teachers and preachers. So I found myself just kind of caught up in this civil rights movement. I can't tell you when it began. I just knew one day I woke up and I knew that I had to be involved in the civil rights movement. Now, the crux of the civil rights movement was about revolved around our right to vote. I have just a couple of handouts, just kind of pass those, and Dolores alluded to it about the water fountain. Pass those out. The civil rights movement for me, and still does, really revolves around our right to vote. Can you imagine going to the courthouse in Mississippi to register to vote, and you're being given a 21-item questionnaire? A 21-item questionnaire. Our white counterparts were given a 6-item questionnaire. And when you got to item number 17, you had to go to the registrar's desk. I don't think I have enough here, but I just kind of share it. When you got to item number 17 on that test, on the 21-item questionnaire, you had to go to his desk and reach in a cigar box and pull out a section of the Mississippi Constitution and interpret that section to his satisfaction. So when I went to register, as many of my black friends had done, I went to filled out my application, went to the cigar box, pulled out a section on habeas corpus. Now, how in the world would I have known what habeas corpus meant? I didn't. But I wrote something because I was hoping if he was having a good day, since he didn't know either, that he would allow me to write my name in the big book, as we said. And so when I finished my test, I walked up to him and I was just excited because, see, writing your name in the big book means that you have now become a first-class citizen. You're no longer a second-class citizen. You are now, that was a badge of honor to write your name in the book. And so when I finished my application, I went up to him and I stood toe-to-toe, because I had a lot of bravery, still do. And I said, well, how did I do? He looked at the application, mean rascal, mean. He said, you didn't pass. I said, well, sir, what was my mistake? He said, nigga, I told you you didn't pass. Get the hell out of my office. And that's how most blacks were treated. That's why there were only 100 registered out of a potential of 10,000. The law said at that time, if you failed your test, the law said you could not come back within 30 days. I couldn't go back the next day and try again. I had to wait until another month had passed. But I took that month. I came to Jackson, came down to the courthouse, went through the Constitution, read it, made notes and studied, so that hopefully when I went back in 30 days, I would be able to at least answer item number 17. Same thing happened. Went back, item number 17, pulled out the same section, habeas corpus. But that time, I knew what it meant. And I was ready to take him to task had he said I didn't pass. And so writing my name in the registration book was key for me. But that day, that first day when he kicked me out of his office, if you watch the movie A Time to Kill, was filmed in my hometown of Canton. I walked down the corridor of that courthouse. And this is not getting you students, but this is what I said to myself. I'm going to get your job. I'm going to get your job. I had never had any ideas of running for public office because I didn't know what to do. How many of us really did? But I had a resolve. I remembered ain't nothing to it but to do it. And when election time came, the community started rallying around me, approaching me to run for public office. And I said, I don't know what to do. Mrs. Annie Devine and different people that you may have read about, I don't know what to do. She said, Florence, you can do it. We need somebody on the inside as looking out rather than on the outside looking in. And so when election time came, on November the 5th, 1968, I didn't run for his position. I ran for the position that supervised his office. And I won it. So ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the first African-American female to be elected to a public office in Mississippi since Reconstruction. And I chronicled that journey in my bestseller, Looking Back to Move Ahead. Also, Dolores touched upon something else, and I know my time is short. I want to pass this around. This is an authentic sign that was placed in many establishments said, no colors allowed. This was in a theater in Tennessee. Pass that around. Feel the weight of this. Many of those signs were around, just as you saw the for color only water fountain sign. That was our way of life. That's how we live. So young people, and I've also done some other work. I have 2 or 3 DVDs. My latest one is Standing Tall in Tough Times, and on this DVD, I was a keynote speaker the night that then Senator Obama was nominated. And I did a keynote speech in Dayton, Ohio, so Standing Tall in Tough Times is one of my pieces. Standing on My Sister's Shoulders, I was a collaborator. I've done 2 or 3 other pieces, and Before I Be Your Slave. So I do have some things in my library that in my journey of well over 40 years, almost 50, I'm 69 years old. And every time I think about, I'm tired, I can't make another speech, I don't want to catch another airplane, I think about the resolve of not only my parents, but my grandparents and the people who made it possible for me to be able to do the kinds of things that I have tried to do over the years. So I'm still very active. I'm an adjunct professor at Miami University in Middletown, Ohio. I taught there and I helped to write the curriculum, Black Issues in Higher Education. I'm going to prayer review next week to lecture women's class. My book is required reading in the women's English department in Ohio at Ohio State University. So again, I've just tried to take the time and take the gifts that God has given me and to be able to pass them on and to share them with as many people as I can. So your job, your assignment is not optional. Knock on as many doors as you can. Be sure that everybody in your dorm, everybody on your floor is registered. See, you only have to fill out 6 items now. We had to fill out 21. So you be sure, if you are not registered, when you get back to wherever you're going, you make it to the courthouse. Because you have to go to the courthouse, and you go to the pool all down registered. You know, you go to the grocery store. And so this is the price that we pay so that you would be able to have these opportunities. And it was the students, your ages, who came to Mississippi to help us in this struggle. It was the students, your ages, who were beaten along with us, who were jailed along with us. Some didn't make it. Sherronna Goodman and Cheney didn't make it. But it was students your ages who caught the vision, who caught the fire, who understood the necessity for them to be involved in helping to make this struggle one of community. And so young people, go back, get involved. It is your business. Don't say, well, it ain't mine. It is your business. We have a very, very important election coming up in November. Vote however you choose. But I'm proud to say, in my lifetime, which I never thought I would see, I have witnessed the first African-American president. And they talk all this crazy nonsense about Barack. Barack is one of the smartest I've met. He's one of the smartest men you will ever meet. And one thing about him, he can't be no worse than Sarah Palin. Any comments or questions? That's just a little remark.
We're going to engage questions probably towards the end of the session. As Mr. McLaurin is coming up, I did pass out a flyer there just to let you all know that Ms. Flunzy Brown Wright is one of our Hamer Humanitarian Award recipients for this year. And in the past, we've also had Mr. Charles McLaurin as an award recipient, and Mr. Hollis Watkins as an award recipient of the Humanitarian Award, of the Hamer Humanitarian Award. So I just wanted you all to know that and see that. And at this time, Doc.
Thank you, Keith, and good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
To listening to Ms. Wright, and unfortunately I got here late. I didn't get the beginning of our first speaker, but all of what each have talked about is certainly the truth, and it's certainly a part of our journey from slavery to Obama. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking, but I got involved in the movement early. I want to talk about how we got to Atlantic City in 1964 and how we, for the first time, got the attention of this nation. How, for the first time, the nation heard about the problems, the oppression, the domination of black people in Mississippi. I got involved in the movement when the Freedom Riders came to Jackson. I was born here. I wanted to say that quickly. And I went to Lanier High School, went to Mary C. Jones High School, all segregated black schools. Jackson State University. Unfortunately, I left and didn't come back until later. But Jackson was, as a boy growing up here, Ms. Wright mentioned about, and the other speaker, having to get off of the street or cross the street for white people to pass, get on the bus and have to go walk straight through to the back. And when the bus filled completely up, you had to get up out of that seat and give it to a white person who was standing. Many times when the bus was filled with white people from the front, back to that back door, you had to hand your money to the driver and walk around to the back door, and if the driver was not feeling good that day, he just drove off and left you and standing. So I know about how we were treated, but I want to talk about how we got free.
All right.
The Freedom Riders came into Jackson in 1961, and my friends and I hung out in Georgetown, where I lived out near Lanier High School. Have you toured Jackson yet? Okay, so many of the places I'm going to talk about you're not familiar with, but I want to move us along so that we can see how the movement that people talk about developed. A movement developed in this state, and it was that movement that got us to Atlantic City, and it was that movement that changed the political landscape of this nation and created rules, regulations, and guidelines for inclusion of black people, and those same rules, regulations, and guidelines helped Obama be president. Well, Medgar Evers, we've heard about it. I think people here have talked about Medgar. Medgar Evers went to college, grew up in the Delta, and worked with a surgeon up there by the name of Dr. T.M.R. Howard. Dr. Howard was a civil rights person, leader of the civil rights movement, organized an organization to help bring about civil rights and voting rights and other rights. He helped Medgar Evers become the first black field secretary for the NAACP in the state of Mississippi. And once Medgar got that job, then he moved to Jackson. But the Emmett Till had been murdered up there. That was mentioned here too. Emmett Till, the 14-year-old black kid who is alleged to have said something or did something that was unacceptable to a white lady. And in Mississippi, anytime a black person did anything to a white man or woman, then that was almost death sentence for that person, especially a white woman. So after that, Dr. Howard, Betty Evans, worked with trying to get the message out to the nation about that. It was Teal's mother who kept the death of her son moving. Even Medgar and Dr. Howard and other state leaders were asking J. Edgar Hoover and asking the national government to do something about it. Hands off was the attitude of this nation about black people in Mississippi. The NAACP was working very hard. Medgar was out there setting up chapters across the state, and then his people, his presidents, was being murdered. And a case in point was Reverend George Lee in Belzona, was shot down in the daylight by white people who did not want him to continue to register blacks to vote. The Mississippi Delta, if you've heard anything about it, in 1950, 51, all the way up until 1970, was almost totally 70, 80, 90% black in most counties. So the white population up there dominated the black population through the sharecropping system. And they also had blacks, no education. Ms. Wright talked about the non-education of black people. Black people had to pass that 21 section form to become a registered voter. You had to pay 3 poll tax prior to any election before you could vote, even if you got on the books. And the few people who were on the books were not enough to do anything to help bring about or to provide protection for us, for black people. The legislature in 1890, the Mississippi legislature stripped black people of the right to vote that had been gained during Reconstruction. They set up that poll tax, they set up that application, and put that qualification to read in as a criteria for registering to vote, when they knew in fact they had denied black people the right to education. So SNCC came into the state. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was born after the Freedom Ride, and a little lady named Ella Baker, working for the NAACP and other organizations, brought these young people who had been involved in the sit-in movement from North Carolina and the freedom rides across the nations and all of the beatings, came to Jackson, Mississippi, and the bus station here that was alluded to earlier, to try to buy a ticket, to come in on the bus and come on to what was the white side of the bus station. The key thing to remember here was that when the Freedom Riders finally got to Jackson, they were all arrested and jailed. So the Freedom Ride stopped here in Jackson until James Bell, who was one of the Freedom Riders, came out into Georgetown, to our community, out to Lanier, out to the food halls where we lived out there on Whitrow Wilson, Whitfield Mill Road, and got a group of us, young people who were students at Lanier, and got us to get involved in the continuation of the Freedom Ride. Bevel challenged us to do something other than the little gang, so-called activity we had going, and those fights that we were engaging in. We had the 2 schools that were mentioned, Lanier and Jim Hill, rival high schools here, both black high schools at that time. And he challenged us to do something creative, something important. And he said, well, look, you all are bad, but you won't go to the bus station on the white side and buy a ticket to go to New Orleans. So several of my friends that night, James Jones and Jesse Harris, and just about 8 of them, I did not go. I couldn't see how that was going to stop Mr. Charlie from lynching me at that point. So They bought tickets, tried to go to New Orleans, and after that, they were jailed. They got out of jail. Dr. King came to Jackson and spoke at the Masonic Temple up the streets here, and there were members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with him. So Jesse Harris and these guys who had been involved in Jackson, and Diane Nash and several other SNCC people got together after Dr. King had spoke, and developed what was called the Jackson Movement. I stayed involved with my friends, but I had not yet gone to jail. Couldn't see how jail was going to help stop Mr. Chiley from lynching me. So we got the Jackson Movement going, and then I met a guy by the name of Lawrence Guillot, who was working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee through a guy by the name of Bob Moses, who was at that time the SNCC field director in the state of Mississippi. Medgar told us that we're going to have a big voter registration drive in the Mississippi Delta. He said, that's the key. He said, we need to get up there to the Delta and register all of those thousands of black people in those counties that are 60, 70, and even 80% black, and we will send a significant number of members to the legislature. We will elect judges and mayors. And this was in 1962. So I joined Guillot and Bob Moses and several others and went to the Delta in 1962. I live in the Delta today. We started a project in Greenwood, Mississippi, and from Greenwood we went to Ruleville, to Clarksdale, to Cleveland, to Belzoni, to Indianola. We met Fannie Lou Hamer. We brought Fannie Lou Hamer into the civil rights movement. She became a kind of an inspirational leader, a person who was very outspoken, beautiful voice, singing, and she and I became then, Bob stationed me in Sunflower County to stay with Mrs. Hamer, to work with Mrs. Hamer. I worked with Mrs. Hamer. We ran her. We set up the organization called COFO. COFO was an organization made up of all of the civil rights organizations working here in the state, NAACP, CORE, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, National Council of Negro Women, all under one banner, because the state of Mississippi was organized against keeping black people from registering to vote or even to become anything other than what they had prescribed for us to be. And that was menial labor jobs, very poor salaries, and as little education as possible. So we worked hard at that with COFO, and after COFO was set up, we later ran Dr. Henry, Aaron Henry, one of the leaders from the Delta, a black soldier who had returned from the war, and went into his hometown, Clarksdale, to continue working to improve the quality of life through voting and registering blacks to become voters. Fannie Lou Hamer, we ran her for a seat in Congress because we had now decided to challenge the seating of the congressmen, the white congressmen who were holding office. And one of the criteria for being able to challenge that was to have, and you had to at least have been a candidate. We had to have at least, and Ms. Wright mentioned Annie Devine and Victoria Gray ran for Congress. Victoria Gray and Annie Devine, we ran them on the Freedom Ballot, set up our own registration booths and form, and got around 90,000 blacks to participate in our own election. And from that, we took that and brought the Freedom Summer. Freedom Summer, we brought thousands of young people from the North, mostly white, many blacks also, but mostly white, and stationed them in the various counties across the state, and they helped us continue our voter registration project. They set up freedom schools, and they helped develop the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. The Freedom Democratic Party, if you remember, challenged the seating of the regular Mississippi delegation to the National Democratic Party Convention in 1964 in Atlantic City. And Fannie Lou Hamer testified before the Credentials Committee. And Lyndon Johnson wanted to be the president. He was already in the office as a result of the president, the assassination. But he wanted to be elected this time. And for the first time, we got the ear. Somebody outside Mississippi heard us. He offered the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party a compromise, if you call it that, 2 seats at large. We had no seats. We were not even a participant in the Democratic Party process here in the state. We were completely outside of any effort to protect ourselves. The vote was what we were after. The vote is our protection. It's the only thing Dr. Henry once told me. He said, Mac, we can't make them love us, but we can sure make them leave us alone. And so we worked at that, and in Atlantic City, that compromise was offered to us. I was a member of the delegation. We had 68 delegates and alternates there in Atlantic City. Walter Reuther, from Labor, Joe Rao, big time lawyers, Dr. King, and everybody was there. James Farmer, all of the organizations that I spoke about was represented in Atlantic City to help us to unseat these Mississippians who were illegally seated. Of course, we wanted a convention floor. We wanted to be in a convention fight. We wanted a fight on the floor. We had support from 8 or 10 delegations in the north, and Lyndon Johnson wanted to make sure that the Mississippi fight did not disrupt his getting support from the whites. And they wasn't going to support him anyway, but he didn't want to fight. So what they did, rather than, they would call the rolls at the convention, each state cast so many votes for such and such a candidate. That year, they selected Johnson by acclamation as opposed to having the floor numbers called in. That was in order to keep the fight down. He had found out that there were certain numbers of delegates that were going to support us, and he used his political muscle through Walter Mondale and Hubert Humphrey, who were both senators, and had them come into our delegations, offer us to compromise, try to work out some way to keep from making these white folks from Mississippi do what they ought to. But we rejected the compromise. We rejected those 2 seats at large. They had already selected the 2 people that they wanted to take the seats. When Mrs. Hamer said, we came all the way up here, our fighting, it would be in vain. We didn't come this way for 2 seats. And we all tired. So the Mississippi delegation the white delegations were told that they needed to sign a loyalty pledge to support the National Democratic ticket. They refused and they left. We stayed around a while and continued to lobby, and that compromise, we rejected it, and then we came back to Mississippi and continued to mobilize and organize. We got the Voting Rights Act, as you know, of 1965. Mrs. Hamer, Mrs. Gray, and Annie Devine were the first black women to be seated on the House floor during a challenge of those congressmen. Of the 5 congressmen from Mississippi were challenged by these ladies. Of course, we lost that, but the significant thing was that these men had to stand aside while that challenge were made. So with the Atlantic City compromise being offered and rejected, out of that, the Democratic Party agreed that it would never seat another segregated delegation, and then the rules were put in, so many women, so many this, and so many of that, and those rules and regulations, in 1968, a delegation from Mississippi made up of whites and black called the Loyalists was seated, and the whites were out of that. So that's the way we got there, through mobilization, organization, and continuous pushing. Keep pushing.
How's everybody feeling?
Good.
How's everybody feeling?
Good.
All right, let me hear you. I'm Hollis, and it's good to be here, and having my brothers and sisters having gotten up and talked about so much, it's no need for me to repeat a lot of the same things that's already been put forward. So I'll try to make some additions that perhaps were left out and give you a little bit about me. I'm the youngest of 12 children. My parents were sharecroppers. We came out of southwest Mississippi. The county that I came from was Lincoln County. Growing up as the youngest child born to sharecroppers, it was very hard to walk into school. I did that. Looking at the white children on the bus, all of that, we did that. You know, I remember there was a time when we had to dig up stumps for 50 cents each. You know what a stump is? Okay, it's the remain once you cut a tree down, that piece. So if you can imagine digging up a stump that's this big with only a pick and a shovel. But once you dug it up and loaded it on the wagon, then you were given 50 cents per stump. So I did some of that. So it was very hard. I was eventually told that I was poor when I first enrolled in Tougaloo College. At that time, my parents made less than $700 per year. But we didn't entertain the notion or idea that we were poor. As a matter of fact, we fed every week people in the community that was less fortunate than we were. Women who had children, no jobs, no husband, or people that was elderly, couldn't work. We fed them, so poor was not a part of my thinking, my vocabulary until we went to school. Told me, boy, so you were showing up poor. Said, poor, said, poor. You were poor than dirt. Some of us did. But I didn't allow that to deter me. I, growing up as a child, first remember segregation, discrimination very vividly when I went into town with my father, and the white folks wouldn't sell him sugar, because they wasn't selling sugar to black folks. There were times when black folks couldn't buy certain items, but he didn't allow that to stop him. He became the molasses man. And he experimented in making the molasses to where he could make molasses, and within 3 days, all turned to sugar. So people that brought the sugar cane to the mill, they might say, well, I think I have enough to have 10 gallons. I want 7 gallons of molasses and 3 gallons of sugar. That's how they bought it, because he had perfected how to do that. So I'm thankful that he did that. I first got involved in the civil rights movement in 1961 in Macomb, Mississippi, with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, their representative, Bob Moses, who was doing voter registration. Marion Barrett came in as the chairperson of SNCC, explaining that SNCC had two different programs, one voter registration, the other one direct action. I didn't even know what direct action was, that's what we were talking about. So we explained that, got involved, helped to organize a local group there in Macomb. The next thing you know, we were having a sit-in demonstration. We attempted to go to the public library, but when we got there, the library was closed. And we went back and had a sit-in demonstration at the Woolworth lunchtime. Now my parents knew I was working on voter registration, but they didn't know nothing about the direct action. You see, some of us knew that there's certain things we just didn't tell our parents, and you didn't lie to them. So when I got ready to leave that morning, knowing that I was going to be a part of the direct action sitting in, I didn't lie to my parents. I just told them, I said, I won't be back tonight. I'm going to spend the night in Macomb with some of my friends. I didn't tell them. Absolutely. I wasn't for sure what my father would have said. However, that turned out to be all right. We went to jail and spent 34 days in jail for having a citizen demonstration. Being involved in the civil rights movement, there were times when I was threatened with dogs, had to look down the barrel of shotguns, rifles, white people coming by. They had us working on the chain gang. This is up in the old town. And they would get out of their vehicles and go in the trunk of their cars and get these guns and come. And they pointed right in your face and look at you and say, yeah, this is the nigga right here I'm going to kill. The question is whether I want to blow his brains out or his guts out. And you look at him. The guard is just over there chilling. Doing nothing, ain't saying nothing. But if we attempted to go get a drink of water without saying, I need some water, then he would put his gun on us. That was another time when they not only did that, but they moved me to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, where I spent 55 days in maximum security unit on death row. And this was all about trying to get black people registered to vote. Every day they threatened us to go from where we were to the other end of the road. One end of the road you had what was called the hole. The other end you had the electric chair. The hole is solitary confinement, which was a 6x6 concrete cell. The only place it had a place where you get air was on a small crack underneath the door. Put 14 of us in there. 6 feet wide, 6 feet long. It got so hot, sweat was coming down the corner, all four corners of the building. The whole wall was wet all the way from the ceiling to about 3 feet from the floor. We were all blessed that we all didn't die from cholera outside. There were times while there in Parchment, they handcuffed me to the bars. In jail, handcuffed to the bars. But we knew that we were all working for a cause. You've heard the literacy test mentioned. We proved and found out as a result of working in Forest County, Mississippi, Hattiesburg, that was all a fraud. How did we find out? Because in Forest County, we were able to get some high school teachers, some college professors, and several law students went down and attempted to register. They all flunked. All flunked. And you know who said they flunked? It 6th grade exams. So we knew it wasn't about whether you passed the test or not. It was about the color of your skin. So we moved on as a part of that process. It's also important for us to know that had there not been an Ella Baker, there never would have been a student nonviolent coordinator, because she was a part of SCLC, and she insisted that the students did not become a youth chapter of SCLC, that they set up their own independent organization. By the same token, if there had not been a man by the name of Amza Moore that was involved in the civil rights movement, there would not have been a Fannie Lou Hamer.
That's right.
It was Amza Moore that introduced us to Fannie Lou Hamer. He told us when we first was talking with us, he said, there's a woman here you got to meet. He said, if you can get her to get involved, you got to do it. Proved to be that way. And we had a good as a part of that. Another little part of history that we need to make sure we clear up is because a lot of the people that have talked about the 1964 Summer Project, which is referred to as Freedom Summer, referred to Cheney, Swerner, and Goodman as summer volunteers. Well, only one of those three were summer volunteers, and that was Goodman. Cheney and Swerner were workers already in the area, working under the head of Corps. So, only one was a summer volunteer. The other two had gone to Oxford to be a part of the training, just like a lot of the rest of us went, to be a part of the training of the volunteers that was coming to Mississippi and work. And Goodman was one of those volunteers that hooked up with them, developed a relationship, and came back a little bit earlier. So it's important for us to understand that and to know that. Also, even in 1964, in Mississippi, the only place you saw any black elected official was in this little all-black town of Mound Bayou. All-black town of Mound Bayou in the Delta. Other than that, they didn't exist. At that particular time, less than 4%, pardon me, less than 4% of all of the blacks in Mississippi that was of voting age were registered. Less than 4. So, that's why you couldn't have any elected officials in the other areas. And you had registrars who kept turning people down just like they turned my sister down, you know, and was flunking people as they were doing in Hattiesburg, so you couldn't become registered. So, that's what the fight was about, is having the opportunity to participate in this whole process. Mac mentioned the whole process about the freedom vote. We had the freedom vote because people had said, white people, that black folks are not interested in voting. They don't want to vote. They're satisfied. And we were saying that's a lie. So we had the freedom vote campaign to prove that if black people were allowed to register, if black people were not intimidated, they would become registered voters. And as a result of that campaign, as Max said, we ended up having, to the tune of nearly 90,000 blacks that participated in that process. In Mississippi, we were blessed to be able to look at what was actually going on and the benefit of working in an isolated manner or working in a unified manner. And we had COA, as was stated, SCLC, NAACP, and SNCC, all working with the same people, trying to get them registered to vote. So naturally, we needed resources. So you had 4 different organizations were going to the same people to get money to do the same thing. That puts a burden on you trying to decide which one you're going to give money for. So we said, we don't want to let that exist. So based on having a discussion that way, that's what gave rise to us deciding we need one umbrella, and that's what brought in COFA, that we begin to work under that one umbrella, and we organized as a part of it. Now, naturally, people outside of Mississippi saw that in a different light than us. I say that because the head of the national organizations of some of those organizations objected to that and didn't want that to happen. But we said, this is us in Mississippi. In Mississippi, this is what it's going to be. And that's what it was. And as a result, working in COFO, our office was right here. We developed local organizations. As a result of that, as I mentioned, the Freedom Vote came out of that. That also gave rise to us creating the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And that's the organization that we were working on when we went to Atlantic City to challenge the regular season of the Democratic Party in Atlantic City. So it shows that working together in unity rather than as the foundation people now say, in silos, you come out with a lot more results. So this is what we did. There's a lot more that I could say that I won't say because time is of the essence, and I want you to join me in singing a couple of freedom songs, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. I say that because the songs gave us motivation and inspiration. It helped us to be able to overcome those shotguns pointed in our face. It helped us to be able to overcome those vicious dogs that was brought out in our face. It helped us to be able to overcome going to jail. See, the jailhouse was a very powerful weapon, especially the black folks. Why so? Most black folks, and especially black men, that went to jail never made it out alive. That's right. It was like a death sentence. So when they talked about putting you in jail, then, oh, they're getting ready to kill you. That's what they're talking about, doing. Same thing. That's a song that it's called Ain't Scared of Nobody. So we go away the English classes, when we get to dealing with the songs. That's right. So the songs is about communicating with one another. There's a song that's called Ain't Scared of Nobody because I Want My Freedom. Have y'all heard that one? Don't worry about it. You can learn it in less than 30 seconds. Here we go. Just listen to it. Ain't scared of nobody cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. Ain't scared of nobody cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. Let's see what kind of student you are. See if you learn. Ain't scared of nobody cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. Ain't scared of nobody cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. March downtown cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I march downtown cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. scared of gold dollars, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I ain't scared of gold dollars, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. And when they said if you don't turn around and go back, we're gonna throw all of you in jail, we done took that weapon away from you. We added a person in jail instead. I ain't scared of no jail, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I ain't scared of no jail, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. I organize, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I organize, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. We got personal with it sometime, and we would call the names out and say, just like in Greenwood, Mississippi, the evil police chief up there's name was Larry. And we got personal, just looking him in the face of all of this police, and we would say, ain't scared of Chief Larry, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom. I want my freedom. Ain't scared of Chief Larry, 'cause I want my freedom. I want my freedom now. That's another song that we sang that kind of told where we were and where we wanted to go. You know, we talked earlier about segregated schools and all of that, segregated lunch counters and all of that, swimming pools. And this song couldn't ride at the front of the bus and all of that, so this song was called At the Back, this back of the bus. It says, if you miss me from the back of the bus and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be riding up there. So easy to run. If you miss me from the back of the bus and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be riding up there. In the front, I'll be riding up there. I'll be riding up there. Come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be riding up there. If you miss me from the back of the bus and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to the front of the bus, and I'll be driving up there. In the front, I'll be driving up there. I'll be driving up there. Come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be driving up there. If you miss me from Jackson State and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to Ole Miss. Yeah, I'll be studying up there. And Ole Miss, I'll be studying up there. I'll be studying up there. Come on up to Ole Miss. I'll be studying up there. One of my favorites. If you miss me from the picket line and you can't find me nowhere, come on down to the city hall. I'll be serving as the mayor. I'll be serving as the mayor. I'll be serving as the mayor. Come on up to the city hall. I'll be serving as the mayor. All right. We're gonna stop right there and see if we can take a few questions and answer a few questions from you, so you can direct your questions to any of us that you would desire. Question, right here.
This is for all of you. I mean, obviously from your stories, your families have seen generations of oppression, and I go back to Dr. King's last speech that he made in Tennessee. He said, "I may not make it to the promised land, but I guarantee you my children will be there one day." Do you think we've made it to the promised land yet? Have we made it to the land that Dr. King spoke of, the dream? Have we envisioned it yet, or are we still on our way?
I'm gonna take the privilege and ask all of us not to speak to it. That way it'll open it up for getting more questions in. So who wanna speak to that?
I really do.
All right, come on.
I really do. When I was active in the civil rights movement, I'm a mother of three, divorced mother of three. And in addition to the lives of my children being threatened, as was mine, but I'm proud to say today that my daughter is sitting in the audience. Stand up, Cynthia. Stand up, Cynthia. She is the second generation because she is the executive director of the Mississippi Freedom Riders Project, the project that actually puts on these programs. And so not only is the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, what did I say?
You said Freedom Rider.
I mean, Freedom Riders. She is the executive director of the Mississippi Civil Rights Veterans, of which Hollis is one and I am one. And so Cynthia and also Mrs. Victoria Gray has children who are involved. So a number of us old timers do in fact have younger people who are involved because they understand the specialness of our story. They understand the legacy has to be left. We're leaving a legacy. The question is, see, we're old. I'd say I'm going on 7 years old. And
I'm not.
I'm not.
Well, I'm 72.
Okay, good. I feel 25 because I'm not sick. I'm not sick and I can run, I can move, but I'm saying chronologically, we're casting the torch. But we got to have something to pass.
That's right. Amen.
Racism still is rising.
Yes, it is.
Always got a lot more work to do. Other questions?
On that other question about whether we have reached the promised land, you have to remember something that Dr. King said. He said that he believed we would get to the promised land how and when? As a people. See, he said, we'll get there as a people. And I believe that he was talking about the United States of America. No. Now, yes, some of us have reached the promised land, okay? What was your goal? We have not reached the promised land that Dr. King talked about. That's my opinion. Because we are becoming more divided now along racial lines, along religious lines, and so we're not ready for that yet. But I think the election of Obama, who I consider to be the birth child of the civil rights movement. In other words, Obama is what came out of the civil rights movement. This is, from slavery and all of along that journey, we were able to get a black man. Now, if you remember, those of you who were in school, in 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the Dred Scott decision, said that a black man had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. So we've reached a very, very, very this is a milestone. So no, we ain't there yet as a people, but we're headed, hopefully, with your help. See, it's time now for you. See, Ms. Wright talked about the students. And you know, there was those 4 students out there in Greensboro that started a little movement. That little movement, of course, movements had been going on earlier. Talked about Dr. Howard, CORE and SNCC had their, not SNCC, CORE, and the NAACP had been here, and a lot of things had been going on. But a lot of it was to fight in the courts. And the court had, you know, slows things down. And these students made a move here that was a pivotal point from where we, our whole race was. And they brought something new in. And they moved across this country and changed. Now, it's your turn.
That's right. Okay, we got time for a couple more questions. Okay, we've got 3 hands right there. Let's see if we can take it. 1 or 2.
Clearly, you guys agree with Martin Luther King's 9/9, of course. What did you guys think when Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party came about, and what did the line, of course, like, what was your take on the movement at that point?
Well, it was hard for me to accept nonviolence, but I didn't want to do anything that was going to mess up the movement. Malcolm promoted self-defense, not turning the other cheek, not being violent, but by leading to self-defense. It's unfortunate that the FBI and the CIA infiltrated the Panthers, as a part of that process, and got young people to go off into a direction that was going to lead to death and destruction, because the original Panthers, quote unquote, were not talking about what the young brothers and sisters came in and began to talk about. They didn't even call themselves Panthers. Came out of Lowndes County, Alabama. They were dealing with building a political and economic base, and if it became necessary, they would defend it in whatever way they wanted to defend it. And they just decided that since they were taking on the regular Democratic Party in Alabama, who had a big rooster, white, that was their symbol, that they would get one that would overcome a big white rooster, which was a big black cat. And folks took it and started calling them Panthers and all of that. And it's unfortunate that that attitude of everything was encroached upon by the FBI and the CIA and whispered into the ears of young folks and showed them how they needed to take that to a whole nother level without them understanding that they had these people in their midst, and as a result of that, set them up to be executed.
And to quickly add to that, you see, we knew they had the gun. We knew that we had no ammunition. We knew that they could outshoot us, and they would kill us. And so we had to the best of our ability, subscribe to a non-violent approach, as opposed to, because they would have mowed it down like rats, and they did. And so we just had to allow logic for the most part, and looking at the self-defense of others. It wasn't about killing us. But see, there were scores of other folks that we were leading, that we were responsible for. And so we knew that we did not have the ammunition.
But Malcolm's approach helped us.
It did.
See, Malcolm's approach, he said, you give them ballots or you get some bullets. So Malcolm served a very significant role in helping to push the nonviolent movement forward. The power structure would rather deal with Martin Luther King than Malcolm and the Muslims and the Black and the Panthers. So I admire Malcolm. I was in the movement, but and I subscribed to nonviolence, but I was not a nonviolent person. But that, as Ms. Wright said, that was the best technique for achieving what we needed to do in the long run, because we've been wiped out in a minute, in a week or 2 weeks, and they could have legitimately said, well, we killed them because they were trying to, you know, take over the government by force.
So there are still groups in our society that are told that they're not worthy of rights, that they're not, that they don't deserve kind of the rights that a lot of other people have in society. And knowing that you went toe-to-toe with people that told you that, you know, many years ago, and you know, it still exists today, what would you tell those groups of people now? What message would you tell them that when they're standing toe-to-toe with somebody that says you don't deserve these rights? How would you, what words of inspiration or what message would you tell them to not calibrate that to hate, but to kind of calibrate that energy to kind of inspire some change?
Tell them to organize. You tell them to organize. And that's what, if you've seen recently, the SNCC Legacy Project is in the process of trying to get the movement right now. That's young people and others who are organizing around Wall Street and businesses to come to some training to develop a cadre of non-violent protesters of today. So they would need to get organized, and because there's power in organization. We can tell you that. And if you organize and you move people, you'll get some respect. You'll at least get the ear of the people who want to continue to be elected.
And also to tell them to remember the 4 little girls in Birmingham who on an ordinary Sunday morning, moms dressed them up real pretty, sent them off to church, they came home in body bags. You tell them to remember Emmett Till. Tell them to remember Medgar Evers, Reverend George Lee, Vernon Davis. The list is Mrs. Viola Lee Uzo. The list is Bloody Sunday. The list just goes on and on and on. Tell them to remember the people who gave their lives, who would still like to be alive today. But tell them to remember the sacrifices that those people had. I've been to jail. I've been shot at. I've been tear gassed. All for the right to vote. Tell them to remember Miss Fannie Lou Hamer's. Look up that address that she presented at the Credentials Committee, talking about her being in jail when Medgar Evers was assassinated, and how we have to sleep with our telephones off the hook, all because we want to just register and vote. So tell them to remember those people who have gotten us. Tell them to remember Hollis Watkins. This gentleman, Google this man's name. You're in the, and it's not that we're so great. It's not that we're so great. But tell them to remember just these 4. This lady here was 13 years old. How old were you when you went?
15.
15 years old when she went to jail as a freedom rider. Tell them to remember Flonzie Goodloe Wright, whose kids' lives were threatened. Tell them to remember Reverend McLaurin here. And those of us who, again, are still out on, we could be at home, you know, we've all worked long enough to retire pretty comfortably. But we're still out here, simply because we feel as though, I feel as though I'm on an assignment. It's the difference between a job and an assignment. See, I'm on an assignment. And so you just tell them to remember those people who, but for the grace of God, we would be gone ourselves, but we've been left here for a reason. So look up some, tell them, remember Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? The first black woman to file a lawsuit against her plantation owner and win it because her son, Peter, was a slave down the road with old Master Dumas. So you tell them to remember Harriet Tubman, who helped to free almost 1,000 slaves, including her mother and her father. Frederick Douglass, who wrote about the atrocities of slavery. So, you know, just do a little homework and just tell them to just don't forget these people here, because this is why we're here. We're not here because we're so great. We're here because somebody cared enough to give their very best so that we could. And now it's your time See, because history is going to be rewritten. Just as we have the first African-American male president, one day, let me stand up. And I won't be long. And this is such a rich learning experience. One day, this country is going to experience its first female president. Ladies and gentlemen, for all that I know, I could be looking in her face today. I could be looking in the face of the first female president in this room. It's going to happen.
And also tell them not to do it to seek accolades. Tell them to do it not to seek monetary gains. And tell them to do it not so they can be on television. And tell them not to do it because they want to become famous. Tell them to do it because they feel in their heart that it's something that needs to be done. And I want to help make things better. Because that is what we didn't do it seeking any kind of accolades. At 15 years old, I was not thinking about seeking any kind of accolades. I wasn't thinking about, any kind of monetary gains, anything like that, being on television, anything like this. I did not think about those things. I just saw that there was something that was not right. And I wanted to make a difference. And I never thought for one moment that one day I would be a black woman going down in American history. Those things were not on my mind. So tell them if they're doing it to seek all those things, they don't need to pursue them because it would all be for the wrong reasons.
And just before we move to this last question, I just want to say we should know, go to the position of not allowing others to define for us who we are, what it is that we do. We define that for ourselves. Yes, ma'am.
All of you say active roles in the civil rights movement, and looking back, what do you think was the movement's greatest triumphs and failures?
What was the movement's?
Greatest triumphs and failures.
Triumphs?
Yes.
And fears. Okay.
Okay. Very briefly.
What was the greatest triumphs and fears
Oh,
back in the movement?
Failures. Oh, failures.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Well, I think the greatest triumph for me personally was to get the right to vote and to feel comfortable driving along the Mississippi Highway with the possibility now of getting before a jury of my peers.
My greatest triumph was once I became an elected official, I then had the power to correct a lot of voting injustices. And one of the first persons that I had the privilege to register was my 54-year-old daddy. We had been denied the right because he couldn't pass that 21-item questionnaire. And so that was, I still hold that today, but there were fears because I was a divorced mother with 3 kids. And they not only threatened my life, but the lives of my kids. And I would have to, when they would get out of school a lot of times in the afternoon, I would have to drive a block or 2 from them as they were walking home to be sure that they got home safely. And I never told them that until they became adults. They just learned this later. So I was afraid for my children that they would be harmed, as many were.
And I think the failure, again, in my opinion, of the movement was to not see the need to go, when we reached the point where we were getting the right to vote, we could eat where we wanted to, getting some better jobs, we did not come back and get you all ready.
Yes, that's right. We lost a generation.
Very briefly, I'd just like to say, to me, the greatest triumph was being able to get as many young people as we were able to get to come together and work and risk losing their lives for a cause that would be benefiting all of us. To me, one of the, I don't like the second part of the question. And to me, that don't take it where we need to go. But I will say, one of the greatest things that I think, and see, I don't call this what you would call it, but I say one of the greatest things that we overlooked was to be able to connect, building an economic base that would support and sustain the work that people were doing. So I just want to say, now we're going to close out with one more song. And this song is a song that we took Harold Belafonte's song and redid it. Now, Harold Belafonte in his song, he said, hey-oh, he said, hey-oh, hey, daylight come and I want to go home. We didn't say that. We weren't ready to go home. We said, this is what we said. We said, freedom, freedom, freedom. Won't freedom come and it won't be long.
Some of y'all moved on.
Give us freedom. Hey! Freedom come and it won't be long. Well, I took a little trip on the Greyhound bus. Hey! Freedom come and it won't be long. To fight discrimination and this we must. Yeah! Freedom come and it won't be long. Freedom. Freedom, hey! Freedom from and it won't be long. Well, some will say Peter, some say Paul. Freedom from and it won't be long. Well, it's only one God that made us all, yeah. Freedom from and it won't be long. Freedom, freedom, hey! Freedom come and it won't be long. Well, for freedom, like we were bound in jail. Freedom come and it won't be long. Well, we had no money to go out there. Yeah. Freedom come and it won't be long. But for freedom, like we began to shout. Freedom come and it won't be long. Then the jail doors open and we walk out. Yeah. Freedom come and it won't be long. Freedom, freedom, hey! Freedom come and it won't be long. Well, if you don't believe that I've been to hell, freedom come and it won't be long. Just follow me up to the parchment jail. Freedom come and it won't be long. Freedom, freedom, hey! Freedom come and it won't be long. Freedom, freedom, hey! Freedom come and it won't be long.